Welcome everyone to Flyover Footy on the Big 550 KTRS. My name is Matt Baker. Thank you so much for joining us on this special edition, I guess, of Flyover Footy on a monumental week. We are at the tail end of quite possibly the biggest week in the history of St. Louis City SC. I don't mean to overblow things, but when you fire your sporting director who has quite literally built your team from the ground up, there's nothing else to do except for lay it out like it is. Most monumental week, in my opinion, of St. Louis City SC. Again, on Flyover Footy, we're going to go deep into Houston in just a little bit. We do have a match that we do that. I want to spend a little bit of time looking at the press conference, the media availability, rather, that Diego Giglani, the president and GM of St. Louis City SC, gave on Tuesday of this week. So we're going to start off with that. Diego spoke to the media on Tuesday. Part of his comments can be found on our social media, looking at the role that he and John Hackworth will have. And I will play that video in almost its entirety in just a little bit. So if you're watching us on our live stream, you'll get to see that. If you are joining us on the audio version, you will get to hear that in just a few minutes. Otherwise, if you want to see that entire media availability that Diego Giglani had, follow at Drew Young Radio. Our friend Drew Young with Odyssey posted the entire video that was that he took and that captured all of the questions that Diego fielded from reporters, from media, and those who were there at training on Tuesday. I want to go through a little bit about some of the questions that he answered because they offer a little bit of an insight into what the organization is going to be doing going forward, as well as why now. There were a lot of interesting nuggets that Diego offered to us, even if I would say, even if he not sugarcoated things, but didn't lay much blame on really anything as a part of this process. That is an interesting note. I will offer as well, in addition to my content here on Flyover Footy, I urge you to tune into the St. Louis Soccer Weekly on the Big 550 KTRS that will be airing on Friday night. I'm going to be a guest on that show. We didn't have Soccer in the Lou on Tuesday this week, so check out the Big 550 for St. Louis Soccer Weekly on Friday night, where I will offer, I think we're going to get into more of a conversation on this entire Lutz finish deal firing. But on Flyover Footy this week, we're going to focus on Diego Giglani because I did the Lutz deep dive, the recap on what happened, the postmortem. That was on our last episode. If you missed that, check it out in the Flyover Footy feed. But right now, I want to get to some of the questions that Diego fielded. So before we look at Houston, let's look at what Diego offered. And some of the questions that he fielded from the media were related to building the team in 2026. So questions such as how competitive will the team be expected to be in 2026? And Diego referenced the team having a lot of the building blocks of a competitive squad. He noted that improvements will come through some impactful signings like DP slots, U22s, and they already have on some, where they focus on players with low injury risk and availability. Now, I think this is an interesting note to call out some of these MLS roster designations, because it's been something that fans have really had taken umbrage with, had an issue with over the past few seasons, few transfer windows, especially as we've started to take more and more of a useful aspect. We've started to leverage some of these roster designations a little bit more. But there for a while, we were going without U22 slots being filled. We were alternating between Roman Berkey was and wasn't a DP. The young DP mechanism has yet to be really used. I think there was some confusion early on about Isak Jensen. If you remember that name, his designation between a young DP and a U22. The fact that Caden Glover remains on our supplemental roster slot as opposed to an off-roster homegrown or some other mechanism for him, that speaks volumes to some of what I think a lot of us perceive to be a misuse of some of these designations. Diego noting that he looks to use the improvements to our team to take advantage of those slots. This goes into right off the bat the flexibility that St. Louis will have at the end of this season. When 2025 wraps and you have John Hackworth making the technical decisions, which we'll get to that in just a minute, he's going to have a massive amount of flexibility to work with. Not just the 15 or so players whose contracts are up at the end of 2025 and what that means for the turnover of our roster. But as it stands right now, we only have one actual designated player under contract for 2026. We have, I believe, 2 U22s under contract for 2026, that being Jake Girdwood-Reich and Falou Fall. Chris Durkin won't be a U22 next season. He will age out of that designation, so we'll have to figure out some other way to keep him if we want to. And Songbin Zhang his contract's up at the end of 2025. It's presumed that we'll re-sign him, but as of now, that's not a guarantee. So John Hackworth has only one DP and two U22 slots. That's a lot of work that Diego and John Hackworth have at their disposal to fill, to use, and they could go any number of ways. They could go a 6, they could go another striker, they could add depth on the wings, add an impactful signing on the wings through one of these mechanisms. The other aspect to this is Klaus will not be a DP next year. Not only is his contract up at the end of the season, but if we pick up his option, he should be a TAM player. That's kind of how this all works because of the cost for his transfer being why he's a DP in general. That amortization of his transfer fee occurs during the life of his contract. That's great for that. So a lot of flexibility, and Diego noting some of these slots, that gives fans a lot, not just hope, but expectations now. We have expectations that we're going to be competitive and sign players that are expensive and valuable. But with Diego starting off right off the bat, calling out the DPs and U22 slots, that sets expectations as it should for fans. Diego also mentioned negotiations with Roman Berkey, which Berkey also addressed in a question that I asked him on Thursday's press conference. But Diego said the negotiations are going well. Berkey knows his value on and off the field. Talks have started with him and his agent. The club is confident about reaching a good agreement. Roman Berkey offered a little bit of insight on his end on Thursday in the press conference, noting that the discussions and negotiations from Berkey's side were going straight through to Lutz Pfannenstiel. And on Berkey's side, once Lutz was fired, Diego immediately called him. Once the news came out on Tuesday, Diego immediately called him and kind of begun those negotiations himself, picked up, said that things are picking up right where they left off, that Diego reiterated the value that Roman Berkey has to the organization, and they want to come to an agreement still. Berkey seemed, at least at face value, optimistic about this happening. So that's good to hear. Why make this decision now was another question that was asked. This one has layers to it. Not just what the answer was, which the answer Diego gave was basically there's no perfect time to fire a sporting director, and he's spot on with that. But he noted that a post-transfer window was logical, saying that this gives them months to prepare for 2026, sequence some of those key decisions properly, and build for 2026. Around this answer, Diego had also said that his intent, and I think I mentioned this on the Monday pod, his intent is to sign a sporting director and a head coach before the beginning of camp in 2026, which puts a deadline of less than 5 months, like I mentioned the other day. That's an interesting timeline to place firmly, though Diego does believe, and he said in the presser that there's a difference in giving yourself all this time to find a head coach that they had last season and that they were giving themselves this season. You don't need necessarily to give yourself a carte blanche in time. He doesn't see this as a negative in setting a specific timeline around making these hires. They've also paused, at least for the moment, the head coaching search to sequence this. That is another little bit of news that we found out. And that all makes sense. There's a lot of things here that Diego said that makes sense. I agree that if you take at face value, let's take this for a moment, that sporting director is going to be fired. At some point in time, it's going to happen. When is the best time to do that? There's never an actual best time, but when is the least worst time to do that? And I would absolutely argue that the end of a transfer window is probably right up there in the least worst times to fire a sporting director. The other argument is the end of the winter, but that's at the beginning of the season. And so you're in trouble, I would say, as far as making summer signings, which we know how impactful summer signings are. So face value, I kind of agree with Diego here that post-summer transfer window, as soon as that wraps, the sporting director doesn't have any, I would say, active duties for the roster this season. It's all about building for next season at this point. He's given the team exactly what they're going to have for the remainder of the year. Not that the job is done. There are still things that need massaging at certain points. I'm sure decisions made for the 2025 season as they happen, injuries, buyouts, all those things can, you still have to have your finger on the pulse. Don't get me wrong. But the idea is that now you do have the largest amount of time from one transfer window to the start of a next season, or the start of a window of movement that you're going to need to orchestrate as the sporting director. And so with this happening now, I get that. The only question that I have, and I asked it in the press conference, was related to why now and not necessarily next season. Does that signal that the club is unhappy with how the summer transfer window went? And it's kind of a carrying forward of what happened with Olaf, being unhappy, obviously, with the result of that head coach, the dismissal, and then you have the transfer window wraps. You choose now, as opposed to the end of the summer transfer window next season, right before Lutz's contract is up for them to part ways. Diego really backed off of placing any kind of blame for any negatives or positives or her signings that didn't happen in the transfer window. And that was kind of fascinating, because that was an opportunity that Diego had to at least offer a straight line explanation on why now. Instead, we get more of this, I would say, nebulous concept, and business speak very much so, about trying to shore up and determine the long-term strategy and vision of this organization, and seeing now as the perfect time for the synergy between, now you can hire a sporting director who can then help hire the head coach, who can then start to develop the roster and build on that. So it's more of what I would kind of think as a clean break from the Lutz Pfannenstiel era, because they have this opportunity with no head coach in place. They took it, and now it's John Hackworth at the helm going forward to build this roster going into 2026. So it's an interesting notion of not placing blame, which I understand, because Lutz Pfannenstiel was the man. He was St. Louis City. He not just built this club from the ground up on the sporting side, but he was the only visible person at that level that we've ever had. And so this was a big move on that front, but it signals, at least at face value, what Diego is saying, a strategic shift as opposed to a reaction to anything that Lutz had built incorrectly or subpar. And this played into the supplemental roster as well when I asked him about his thoughts on that, because let's be honest, guys, the issues that St. Louis has had this season have exposed our supplemental roster because of all the injuries. The reason a supplemental roster exists in MLS, by and large, is to supplement what happens with the senior roster, whether it's injuries, international breaks, something that keeps a senior roster player out. You have a supplemental roster to draw from. They're not supposed to take center stage. They're supposed to be the squad rotation type players that are at a level to where they can temporarily fill in maybe for a senior roster. And you're going to hit gold on some of these. Your homegrowns are going to take big steps. Yeah, that's great. Devin Padelford is an example of somebody who St. Louis has seemingly hit gold on, that they're happy with him and his production. He's a supplemental roster player. But overall, I think that's been a point of frustration this season and into last season, where we had to continuously kind of refill with quick signings like Johnny Klein, Jay Reed, Michael Wenzel. All these players last season we had to quickly sign to the supplemental roster just to be able to compete. And they saw significant minutes. This year's kind of no different. Akil Watts, Josh Yarrow, Jay Reed again, Haziel Orozco, since he's come on, supplemental roster players that have had to play significant minutes. So Diego, by not challenging or at least acknowledging a deficiency in that, kind of takes the entire reasoning from this decision away from performance-based and looks to more the strategy long-term of our club is best met by this move now, so they can have a clean break in how they build this next phase of St. Louis City. Diego did note there's nothing urgent in the next few weeks. Some of the key priorities that are pretty obvious to everyone are end of season player options and renewals, selecting a new head coach, preparing for the winter transfer window, noting conversations are already ongoing with agents and players. So that's kind of fairly apparent. I asked why now, as opposed to, again, on the why now front, as opposed to when Olaf Melberg was dismissed. And Diego, along the lines I just mentioned, did say that at Melberg's departure, there were no active talks about Lutz. So when that happened, a lot of the fan base was discussing why isn't Lutz and or Diego the one to go in addition to Olaf. They made this awful call. The speed in with which the move happened and things just hit nosedive so hard was swift, and it was shocking to everyone. So how did this not cost more people their job? And the best we have on that is that based on Diego's comments, no active talks about firing Lutz at that time were happening. And it also not disappointed with this transfer window. This past window, Diego did note that it was focused on clearing roster space, bringing in more younger, more physical players suited to the style. It was the beginning of the squad reconstruction. And that was no more apparent, to his point, I completely agree with that, than what I mentioned on Flyover Footy a few weeks ago. And it was in looking at the transfer window, you can see straight lines between former players that we had signed and that were perennially injured in Rasmus Alm and Joachim Nilsson, and bringing in their younger replacements this window in Songbin Jong and Falufal. Profiles are extraordinarily similar, and bringing in those players and essentially cutting bait on Alm and Nilsson. Nilsson with the contract buyout, Alm with the season-ending injury, though his contract is up, so it's likely he's seen the last minutes for City. That's a pretty straight line, and it speaks to Diego's comments about beginning the squad reconstruction, which is, again, an interesting note that Lutz is the one who oversaw the beginning of this reconstruction, yet now they pull the trigger, not letting him have any further moves. One of the other aspects to this is, how did the players react? There is no secret through any of this that Lutz Pfannenstiel was, I've said it before, seemed like he was more akin to a second father to some of these players, especially with Edu Leuven and all the things going on with his family. So it's only natural to want to know, how did the players react? How were they told? Was care taken to do this for a figure that means so much to so many players? And Diego, again, he's not going to be very, I would say, sentimental about the whole thing, as opposed to this is the business of it. But he did say they took it tough, especially the ones that have personal ties. But all of the players know, as Diego said and alluded to, is that this is a results-driven business. That you show up, and you never want to show up and have somebody fired or gone that you've come to know and trust and love. But if you don't produce, then that's a risk. And at some point it happens. You just hate when that actually arrives. The frustration with the performance exists throughout the club. So he said, not a complete surprise that something like this would happen, but obviously tough news. And it is going to be a story to follow. I think I'll mention this here in a little bit on the Houston preview, but this is a storyline to follow, is how do the players respond on the field to this news? Some of the other things that Diego had to talk about were the importance of MLS experience in hires. This is a really interesting note that I think offers some insight into, probably keep this part in mind as you hear rumors over the next few months if they come out. The big concept that Diego had to say here is that he says that MLS experience is very important, but it shouldn't be exclusive to one particular role. Basically saying he wants a blend of that MLS experience and global soccer experience and expertise across sporting leadership roles. So the idea is that you can take your sporting director, your head coach, your technical director, your assistants, even your head scout, and you want them to have some kind of amalgamation of all of this experience. If you have a sporting director that comes with a lot of MLS experience, maybe even if John Hackworth is given that sporting director role full time, maybe you want your head coach to have a little more, I would say, global experience, whether it's South America, Europe, Africa, Asia, etc. Mixing and matching sounds like it's the name of the game. So keep that in mind as you hear rumors of such and such person being courted for the sporting director, or such and such person being a head coaching candidate for St. Louis City. That may inform some of these other dominoes that could fall in where the experience lies for some of these people. Another good question was, is this a chance to change the club's direction? High pressing, 4-2-3-1, all of these pieces of City's identity that, especially under David Critchley, we've really been reminded about. And Diego said that while reflection is good, they're not going to abandon their style. He was pretty clear that the City identity, the gritty, aggressive, high intensity, all that stuff that we're used to seeing as the identity, remains. He referenced adaptations, but no radical changes. And this sounds to me more similar to the concept of wanting to get better on the ball, as opposed to just punting it long and chasing after it, or hoping to win 50-50s and then a pass and a shot. Getting better in various phases and tweaking things can only help with flexibility, but it sounds like the core identity that we're used to for St. Louis City, at least for right now, as we go into this next transfer window in the offseason under John Hackworth as the technical guy, that's not changing. The last item, and I want to play the video on here of what Diego actually had to say, because this is meaningful, and this is the one I posted on social media. So if you haven't had a chance to watch or listen to it, hopefully this works. Hopefully you hear it on the big 550 KTRS, and I'll catch you on the other side after just a minute.
To be really careful about never crossing the line into technical, and that's why I use that word a lot. For me, it's really clear that in sporting, in soccer organizations at least, I don't want to venture into other sports and suggest I know how those businesses are run, but I do know that there's a tendency in some clubs where non-technical people feel that they know enough to make technical decisions. And I think over the long term, that drives underperformance of those teams. That's what I've been taught and what I've seen to be successful, and that's the line I always draw. The simple way to explain that line would be just based on a person's background and experience. So if someone has an experience close to the field as a coach, as a player, as a scout, that is a technical person. I do not come from that background. That does not mean I can't ask questions and understand how a strategy needs to be built, how a roster has balance, what stats look like. I can for sure ask questions and challenge on those areas. But what I will never do is ask to watch a player and give an opinion if I think he is a good or bad player, or if a coach coaches a session well or not. I will be strict around not crossing that border and letting the experts be the ones to have those decisions.
To not cross the border and let the experts make the decisions. So while Diego is obviously responsible as president and GM of signing off and making the final decisions, carrying forward ownerships, capabilities on spending, it really does sound like he's giving John Hackworth more or less the keys to the castle on the technical side. And this next offseason transfer window, for better or for worse, will have John Hackworth's fingerprints all over it. Now, the downside to that, because I do want to be balanced, I would say, on this, as opposed to just saying that's great that John Hackworth is being given the keys to the castle, is this does put another, and you can look at this good or bad, being honest, this does put another layer between Diego and the sporting decisions. Some people have said that it's in the concept of another fall guy in case things go bad, but you could also easily and probably should look at it more in the sense that this is another person who has the experience and the knowledge to be making these decisions between Diego and the actual decisions being made. I personally found it at least a little bit refreshing and heartening to hear him talk about that distance, that barrier, because Diego does not have the resume and the experience to be making these technical decisions. And for him to acknowledge that and be putting people in place to make the decisions, and for him to have the role that he has in the long-term strategy, making sure there's alignment in maybe and asking the questions that might get to those things, I honestly don't have a single problem with that. And I feel that throughout this season in particular, in particular have called into question a little bit more, hey, let's talk about Diego. Let's talk about the fact that he was signed in April 2023. He started his job in earnest in summer of 2023. And what seems to have happened since he took over, every single bad stretch that St. Louis has had has occurred under his watch. Now, correlation without causation, I do believe, is in play a little bit here. But there's a lot of all of this to me is just building the narrative of what we're about to witness. We're about to witness John Hackworth-led technical side that is in the midst of over a dozen player contract conversations, options that need picked up, Roman Berkey taking center stage on will he or won't he. And then on top of that, you have the sporting director search, followed by a head coaching hire, and following by bringing actual players in, fresh players in that will have to come in to replace who we're not picking up options for, but also continue to enhance. It's almost being lost right now because there's so much else going on, but there is an expectation from fans that this roster will be enhanced and not just turned over, replacing some guys. We need better quality players, and that needs to occur in the winter transfer window, just like it has in the summer at times, regardless of what Lutz has said before about it being more difficult to do business in the winter. I kind of don't care about that anymore. I'm sick and tired of excuses on why certain players can't get signed, and I feel this is a fresh opportunity to make a splash. If you're able, like Diego said, to spend money more consistently in growing each window and how much you spend, you got to keep doing that. And you have to understand that Fans are going to want to have these spots, these DP spots, these U22s filled quickly. Other teams do not have the same problem of going windows without new DP signings. They're turning players over if it doesn't happen. Even Toronto made the massive moves this summer to buy out Lorenzo Insigne and Bernadeschi. All those players that were taking up all that, they finally got rid of them. So expectations are going to be high despite all this turnover as St. Louis looks to shore up the continuity and the long-term strategy, as Diego said. I think that's it. I might circle back a little bit in the wind down of the pod. So if you're listening to us on the Big 550 KTRS, check out the wind down where I will be doing a little bit of a wind down, getting some questions, and I'll probably hit a little bit more on that. For now, you're listening to Flyover Footy on the Big 550 KTRS. Let's preview the Houston Dynamo. Let's start by looking at where these teams have played before and how the results have fared before in these head-to-head battles. St. Louis, I think they might have played Houston the most of any team in Major League Soccer, maybe right there with SKC. I haven't looked at SKC's overall matches played, but City is 3-2-2 all-time against Houston in 7 matches. It's going to be 8 in 3 years when this week is ended, and that's because of our CONCACAF Champions Cup battle to start 2024. 5 of these matches have ended with at least 1 clean sheet. Each team has kept 3 clean sheets versus the other, including a 0-0 draw last year. All time, City has 9 goals scored and 4 goals against Houston. So this is a perennially low-scoring match where at least one team will keep a clean sheet more often than not. That's fascinating from a Houston team that we're going to talk about in a little bit that is possession-based, mid-block oriented. They seem to be structured well to prevent City from scoring against them or vice versa. Even though there are outbursts, there are 3-0 matches on the books that have happened. So it's a very back and forth type of a rivalry that's occurred. And this match, I'll just say it, is not going to be gaining airtime probably on MLS 360 or being focused on social media. It's a match with 12v14. Houston comes into this match 12th in the West with a 7-12-8 record, 29 points in 27 matches. 34 goals scored, 44 goals allowed. That's a -10 goal differential. They are a 3-4-6 team away, so just pretty poor all around. Their last 3 matches are a 2-1 loss at home against San Jose last weekend, a 1-1 draw against Vancouver, and a 2-2 draw at Austin. Currently, the Houston Dynamo are in the midst of a 5-match winless streak. So Ben Olsen's side, as he's their manager, not faring well in this stretch. They're losing ground in their hope to make the playoffs. They are 1-3-3 since the last time they played St. Louis with a 1-0 result. The injuries aren't massive for Houston, but there are some significant injuries that are affecting them, at least as of last week. And we'll get some updates on some of these questionable players going forward. But Nelson Quinones hasn't played since 2023 after just a catastrophic knee injury. He's trained a little this season, but it doesn't seem like he's close to coming back, so I'm expecting him to still be out. Andrew Tarbell, a goalkeeper who suffered a season-ending knee injury back in March, will be out. Franco Escobar was on their matchday roster last week after a lower body injury kept him out for a little bit. He was questionable last week, didn't appear in the match last week, so I think I would expect him, if he continues his trend, to at least feature, if not start, against us. Fullback who's got a lot of skill. Gabe Segal, lower body. He's a striker. He was questionable last week and did not play. The biggest injury that I think is worth watching is Eric Sviatchenko. A lower body injury kept him out and has kept him out for a while. He was training this week. He's been training lately, working his way back from a muscle injury, but it doesn't seem likely that he'll be available. And if he's not, that's a big loss to their back line. He's their best center back by far. He drives a lot of what makes Houston a semi-productive team, at least on the defensive side. So Eric Sviatchenko is a name to watch on whether he'll be available or not when the availability reports come out on Friday around 4 o'clock. St. Louis City SC comes into this match 14th in the West, 5-16-6 record. So Houston has 29 points in 27 matches. St. Louis has 21 points in 27 matches. We have 31 goals scored, 47 goals allowed, and a -16 goal differential. We are 4-5-4 at home this season. We are 3-8-1 under David Critchley. The last 3 MLS matches, as Critchley has now coached in 12, the last 3 are a 3-2 loss at Vancouver, a 3-2 loss at Chicago, and a 3-1 win against Nashville prior to that. There's one trend, at least in these last few matches, as well as probably under the tenure of Critchley, high goal scoring games. David Critchley is continuing to try and find that balance on a consistent basis. But he's clearly found a way to get goal scoring kicked off for his team. Critchley still has yet to win back-to-back games, so we hope to get one down on the books in this match and then carry that forward going beyond this. But we're also only 2 points clear of the LA Galaxy for the Wooden Spoon. The Wooden Spoon is what's unceremoniously given to teams who finish the very last place in all of Major League Soccer in the Supporter Shield. And we are now only 2 points clear of the LA Galaxy for that. We're tied with DC United for second to last place in the Supporter Shield. So amidst all of the dismissal of Lutz Pfannenstiel, hoopla and that story and all of that's going on, St. Louis City slips further and further after these last couple of games. We know this season we only have at most 2 road matches, 2 home matches back-to-back. So this last road trip of sorts was pretty horrendous. Back-to-back losses against Chicago and Vancouver. Even if you have positives from at least that Vancouver game, especially in the run of play, like we talked about last week on Fallout. The biggest storylines for St. Louis going into this are how will the dismissal of Lutz Pfannenstiel affect this team? David Critchley noted on Thursday that the players are affected, saying, quote, "It's thrown in an element of guys looking at their futures, near futures, what their careers look like moving forward. A lot of conversations I've had with the guys are what I expect of them this weekend. It's been a decision overall that's been made. The players think maybe distracted them, but they're coming in focused." This is going to be somewhat of a monkey on your back that David Critchley has to get off his players in time to play this game and to be 100% focused. Like I said earlier, mentality is a story that had been following. Lutz said it, Critchley said it prior to this, and how the players are able to handle these late game moments, whether it is fighting back or holding a lead till the end of the game. The other storyline that hopefully won't affect the game, but it was said on the press conference on Thursday, is Roman Bürki contract negotiations. Bürki, like I said earlier, said Lutz was the main person he was talking to about the situation. But at the same time, right after he got the information about Lutz, Diego called him and assured him that they'll continue and the contract conversations will be going. Bürki said he believes what Diego says, so that's good. The other noteworthy thing this week, as it relates to availabilities and everything, on Tuesday, at training, I had said that Roman Bürki was excused from training, wasn't there, an excused absence. And amidst a contract conversation, discussion, very high profile among the fan base, it's obvious. The jokes were said that the excused absence is so he can go have a contract discussion with LAFC or whatever. Roman Bürki had a wisdom tooth removed on Tuesday. That's why he wasn't there. So when asked about how the players responded on Tuesday, Roman Bürki didn't quite have that perspective because he was kind of out of it, a little bit loopy from the wisdom tooth removal. So that explains the Tuesday thing. And no, it does not have to do with trying to correct a knee injury of sorts like Joachim Nilsson had that we speculated on last season when he had wisdom teeth removed. Just something that Bürki needed to get done. It was a quick appointment, and he didn't want to have to carry it to the end of the offseason, so they found an easy time at the beginning of the week. It was done. He done and dusted. He was back in training on Thursday. Looks fine, talks fine. Everything's good to go. Beyond that, as far as the injuries go to St. Louis City, Cedric Toyshirt remains the only player absent from outdoor training due to an injury. You had Josh Yarrow, Jay Reed, Michael Wenzel, and Joey Zielinski, who were absent from City training on Thursday because they were with City 2. So do not expect any of them, Yarrow, Reed, Wenzel, and Zielinski, to be on the matchday roster against Houston. And based on the numbers we saw at training, that still leaves about 2 players who were training with the club on Thursday who won't make the matchday roster on Saturday. My guess, my speculation, kind of my hope, is that it's Kyle Hebert and Akil Watts. Numbers wise, I think that makes sense. Not that I have anything against them, but numbers wise, it makes sense. You have a player who can play center back or fullback, and you have a player who can play defensive midfielder and fullback. Jake Girdwood-Wright can play both center back and center defensive mid. So that's one of each of them if need be. JGR U22 player who obviously did a little bit better at center back earlier this season. Hasn't seen much time lately, but he's an option that could fill both those. And then at fullback, we do have depth. We've got Devin Padelford, Haziel Orozco. Even if they're playing a little out of position, they've shown highlights. They've shown at least stability there recently. So Padelford, Orozco, Valum, and Totland. Yes, Thomas Totland is still on the team. Yes, he still plays right back, even though we haven't seen him in quite some time. He's at training. He's fully participating. There's nothing wrong with him. He's just out of favor at the moment. So 2 players that otherwise are healthy and ready to go, who will be healthy scratches if all continues to Saturday. And let's look at Houston a little more in depth before we get to my predicted starting 11 and score prediction as well. Houston is going to come out probably in a 4-2-3-1. The Dynamo employed that. They have a possession-oriented philosophy. They have a compact defensive structure. They have 2 holding midfielders, Artur and Junior Urso. They have fullbacks who like to push high and stretch the field. Griffin Dorsey, Franco Escobar, mentioned Franco Escobar earlier. They have an attacking number 10 role, pivotal to link up play, but the team has lost a lot of key players from last season, and they haven't really found a way to consistently correct for that, like Hector Herrera. Nelson Quinones being injured all season has not helped either. The Dynamo are good with their defensive solidity. They're among the league's best at using their possession for defensive purposes, limiting opponents' chances by controlling the ball and forcing play into some less dangerous areas. They were one of the teams last year with the fewest goals conceded and have carried that trend into 2025 as well, with some of the players who were injured last week and may come back, Eric Sviatchenko and Franco Escobar anchoring that back line. On the possession game, it's not just in theory. Houston ranks among the top MLS teams in possession with 52.8% so far this season. That's good for 8th in Major League Soccer. They're also ranked 4th most in attempts in short passes and in attempts and completions in Major League Soccer. They can dictate the game tempo and frustrate opponents with this kind of philosophy, this massive possession, these short passes. They carried this from last season, so this isn't new under Ben Olsen. And in 2025, this season, Houston has 8 games with at least 60% possession, despite only having 49% the last time they played St. Louis. So St. Louis, no doubt, looking to take Houston out of their game model in that manner. Set pieces are also a way that Houston is a dangerous team. They excel in set piece situations, with some of those players like Sviatchenko contributing defensively and offensively with those headers, kind of like we've seen Timo Baumgartel help out in the attack with just height on these dead ball scenarios. Houston is tied for 6th in all of MLS in dead ball passes that lead to a goal. So very dangerous if given the opportunity. That's something we're going to have to watch for if we try to foul, if they get into dangerous areas. Not unlike what we saw last week with Vancouver after that Vollum foul over near the corner, and they were able to score a goal. Set piece defense may be the biggest focus for St. Louis, in something we absolutely cannot allow a goal for against this Houston team. And then the last strength that I have for Houston is their fullback contributions. Griffin Dorsey and Franco Escobar, if he plays, provides width and offensive support down the wide areas, with Griffin Dorsey being pretty consistently on the right, and Escobar runs late into the boxes behind play. So I think of back post runs that our other side fullback might be caught ball watching in the past. When those have happened, I think of somebody like Franco Escobar taking advantage of that. And so that's another thing to watch, are these back post runs if Houston is able to gain meaningful possession into the final third areas. But with that, they've had some real issues getting the ball into the final third. One of the stats that I like to follow on here is field tilt. And Houston, in their field tilt, now, remember, they are a high possession team. Their field tilt the last 5 games have been 75%, 39%, 41%, 49%, and 63%. Only 2 out of the last 5 games have they won field tilt. And field tilt, if you remember, is determined by either passes into or within the final third. It's how much time is spent in the final third, which is the most dangerous part of the field. So if Houston is a team that is consistently getting high possession, but not consistently winning the field tilt battle, it tells me that they're not a good team, not a clinical team in entering the final third with their possession, taking the ball to more dangerous areas. And it offers St. Louis kind of an opportunity to just give them the ball, let them work in these less dangerous midfield areas. And then St. Louis's press can do what it usually does in these scenarios. So defensively, what can we expect from Houston is a mid block. The Dynamo typically set up in a mid block, especially in this 4-2-3-1 or maybe a 4-3-3 if they drop back a little bit. They will position their defensive line and their midfielders compactly around the halfway line, just inside their own half, to control some of these central spaces and limit opponents' access to dangerous areas through the channels. In defense, they have high possession stats, but they use these possession stats as a defensive tool. They press, but it's kind of a selective pressing. They're not a high pressing team like a St. Louis tries to be, but the Dynamo employ these selective pressing triggers to disrupt build-up play, and they use their defensive midfielders, Artur and Junior Urso, in a double pivot to kind of initiate these presses. So they'll almost press inside of their mid block at times, as opposed to getting their forwards out, putting pressure on our center backs. That's going to be interesting to see how St. Louis is able to build around some of the midfield pressure that Houston will give us. When out of possession, Houston still maintains that compact shape. They've got their two holding midfielders, but they're not the only players who are worth watching. I mentioned Eric Sviatchenko. They've got Jack McGlynn. If you're a U.S. men's national team fan, you know Jack McGlynn. And if you've been paying attention to MLS news, you probably know Jack McGlynn because he was one of the first players that was acquired by a team, Houston in this case, for the cash for trade mechanism. Houston paid Philadelphia $2.1 million cash for trade with escalators that can go up to, I think, 3.5 or so. But compare this $2.1 million that Houston paid for McGlynn to the 1.6 that St. Louis paid Minnesota for Songbin Jong. Kind of gives you an idea of the valuation of players for each side. Other players that are key for Houston are Ezequiel Ponce. He's their number 10. He wears the number 10. He's designated player, striker, leads the team in goals. He's got a really high level skill and movement in the final third. He's a good finisher if he gets the opportunity. The problem is Houston doesn't often get him the ball for those opportunities. Their other designated player is Andrzej Linger, Czech forward with 3 goals and an assist, and he wears the number 9. Mentioned Griffin Dorsey. Amin Bassi is the other player that can't go unnoticed. An attacking midfielder, 15 career MLS goals, links up play really well. He's the playmaker to watch as Houston is progressing the ball up the field. There's some interesting stats that really show how Houston is not as good of a shot producing, goal producing, expected goal producing team. Relates to their non-penalty expected goals. Houston has, by this metric, non-penalty expected goals versus non-penalty goals scored, -2. So they are just a bit unluckier or just a bit less than on what they're actually finishing. St. Louis is -7.4, though. So the key thing to remember about St. Louis is St. Louis has perennially been really behind the 8 ball all season on what their expected goal output has been, meaning they're actually producing decent opportunities, but they've been terrible at finishing. This has gotten better over the last few weeks. So as they've had these 3 and 2 goal matches more consistently, they've gone from a -9 to a -7.4, meaning they're getting closer to actually finishing all these expected goal chances. That's a trend that David Critchley has to see continue. Some questions that I'm following for this match. How will the team respond on the field to the dismissal of Lutz? Knowing how Houston plays, I think, is almost secondary to how this team is going to come out given this news. Is it even going to matter? Are we going to see a difference, or is it going to be more conceptual where as fans we're able to see something happen and go, oh, they mental lapse. It was probably has to do with that player and their impact and Lutz's impact to them. That might happen. You're probably going to see some comments about that. But mentality and drive, given the relationships to certain players, it's got to go noticed. It can't go unsaid as an intangible aspect that will impact this game. Consistency in the midfield and the attack. Will we continue to see this? Because the last 3 games, we've had the same 6. We've had Klaus, Hartl, Ostrak, Songbin, Leuven, and Durkin. The backlines changed a little bit, but the attack in the midfield, pretty consistent. Are we going to continue to see that because we've had success scoring goals and creating chances these past few games? The problem that Critchley mentioned on Thursday is more of allowing goals, figuring out how you can keep that attack and balance it with consistent defense, because we've been allowing way too many goals, even if against Vancouver, we allowed 0 in the run of play. And the last question, will Falou Fall start? My answer is yes. I'm not even going to bury the lead on this because David Critchley said last week when Falou Fall had his visa issues and couldn't travel to Canada, they found out that day. Basically, they were just monitoring UPS shipping so he could get that, and it didn't arrive in time. But Critchley did tell us that it was Timo Baumgartel who he went to and told him that he was starting instead. Apparently, he told Timo before that he wasn't going to start because they were giving Falou and Kessler a chance. And then he went back to Timo and said, okay, now you're starting because we have to. It was supposed to be Henry Kessler and Falou Fall last week against Vancouver. I think that David Critchley goes with that approach this week against Houston. The only start that Falou Fall had was against Nashville. He played 90, played 33 against Chicago 2 weeks ago. He played 45 before that against Villa, but I think he gets back into the lineup this week. And with that, my starting 11 for this game, I've got Roman Berkey in net. My back line is Devin Padelford, Falou Fall, Henry Kessler, and Conrad Wallem. I've got a midfield of Chris Durkin, Edu Leuven, and an attack of Marcel Hartl, Tomas Ostrak, Songbin Jong, and Klaus. The biggest question marks are going to be Timo Baumgartel, but I think that's kind of answered by what David Critchley wanted to do against Vancouver. Mackay Joyner, off, a speculative question about when he or will he get a chance to start, and then obviously right back. Thomas Totland, Haziel Roscoe, will they see opportunities? Conrad Wallem had two potential miscues. One, he lost Brian White last week, and White just missed a shot. But the other one was Conrad Wallem fouling Vancouver that led to their free kick goal. Otherwise, I think Conrad Wallem offers the kind of excitement in the fullback role and the width that we want in the attack. It's just a little bit of a defensive liability. So if Critchley values needing an extra defender or a player who won't push more than the halfway line more often on the right side, he could go with Haziel Orozco, but it seems like it's an Orozco or Wallem choice at this time. I like a 2-1 win for this. I think the opportunity is there for St. Louis to right the ship. It's a perfect opportunity against an underperforming team in Houston that really is almost as directionless as we are right now, especially in their last 5 having gone winless. So hopefully we pull one out. And with that, thank you for joining me on this week's Flyover Footy on the Big 550 KTRS. My name is Matt Baker. Tune into our wind down for just a few more bits of conversation on this week, and I will talk to you later. Goodness, folks, that was a race to the end there. Hopefully y'all enjoyed that, and that was good. I am going to be right back, and then we will grab the wind down going. So if you have any questions, this might like a happy hour wind down. Why not? Drop them in the chat, and I will get to them in just a moment. All right, not going to make everybody wait too much longer, especially without audio. We've got questions about U22. We've got questions about sporting director. We'll get to it. And I think there's a couple things that I missed in my notes that we're going to get to, maybe about Houston, but especially about probably Critchley and Lutz, Hack, those kinds of things. So let's get to it. It's probably a little bit of a short wind down, but why not? Welcome back to the wind down. A little bit of a happy hour, more so than a wind down, like I said. But I think this will be a nice little bow on this show. A little shorter of a show, as I'm recording this at a different time than our usual live stream. And if you're listening to this afterwards, if you're listening to the audio version of this, hopefully Mizzou will have won on Thursday, because that's kind of why we're not live streaming and just kind of general everybody not available. But no matter what, we've got Flyover Footy, and I wouldn't miss an opportunity to preview a game, especially with so much happening this week. So with that in mind, one of the big questions is about timing. And so Matthew Schornhauser, why not have a sporting director hired sooner so we don't have to be in the hack purgatory when making decisions that will affect next season? I do think that they're looking to sign a sporting director almost as soon as they can. The notion that they more or less paused, at least for a short period of time, the head coaching search, haven't made any calls, speaks to that, where and let's be clear, there's no timeline other than Diego wants to have a sporting director and a head coach in place before next season. The presumption right now is that John Hackworth will be making all of the offseason decisions, the player contracts, the negotiations, the signings. It's feasible that they could hire a sporting director in the next month and they figure it out. If they have a candidate, if they have an opportunity, maybe it's Hackworth that just gets the job. There's a lot of unknowns in the timeline here that I think assumptions are being made that we're more or less kind of punting until the offseason. We're going to make 2 really quick hires, and then they can start their tenures in camp in January. That may happen, but it's not a given. And so I'm keeping an open mind here, at least myself, on the search right now is for a sporting director, like bar none. That is the first most important search. With that in mind, we don't have a timeline, and it could happen soon. So to me, it's not disingenuous, but like, let's at least give them a little bit of credit here that they're trying to hire a sporting director whenever they can find the right candidate. One thought that I had, though, is if John Hackworth is an actual candidate for sporting director, it's a bit of a nebulous concept of how Hack can show that he deserves the job with a body of work versus the timeline you're putting yourself in to hire a sporting director by January. And what I mean by that is John Hackworth, if he makes all these moves in the offseason, that's going to be kind of his resume as a sporting director, temp sporting director, interim sporting director. Okay, by that time, if you judge John Hackworth off those moves as an interim sporting director, are you going to have another sporting director on standby? Like, all right, we're going to give Hack a go, see how he does, but you stay on the line, because if we don't like the moves he makes, we're coming for you, and it's going to happen in December. I don't see that necessarily happening. So I almost view this as Hack's resume for this potential job is what his body of work with City has been so far as technical director, as Lutz's right-hand man, as all of the Mr. Fix-It items that he's done for City so far, all of his interim roles, the old school City 2, director of coaching, everything like that. That's the body of work John Hackworth has. And so if John Hackworth gets it, maybe that changes the head coaching search to be a little less MLS experience intensive, because John Hackworth has that in spades. Has Hack let them know if he's interested in the position is a question that Dustin has in the chat. He hasn't told us, but the presumption is pretty similar to the head coaching position, where John Hackworth specifically was made a technical director as almost not a silver medal kind of a thing to not getting the head coach, but as an expansion of his director of coaching duties and recognition of what he was doing. That's a role that he wanted. He expanded his scope to be that. He's a full technical director. So he hasn't publicly to us said that yet. But this reminds me of last season, where the assumption was early on Hackworth wasn't interested in the head coaching position. But then as the season progressed and as the responsibilities as an interim coach developed and continued, he definitely said very outright, very directly, yeah, I'm interested. If they ask, I'll take it. I want that job. And so I don't see this as much different, but I do see this as really an interesting opportunity that, or not really an opportunity, a really interesting inflection point for John Hackworth with St. Louis City SC. And this should be a storyline going forward that we watch and we keep in mind, is that John Hackworth had the crack at the interim head coaching job after all he's done. So let's back it up for a second. John Hackworth was hired to be a director of coaching back in 2022. One of the first hires for St. Louis City, director of coaching. We took him from Louisville City. So he was a director of coaching, and then he took over City 2 as the manager for that first season. He wasn't the interim manager. He was just the manager. Like, that was while we were still building out our sporting infrastructure. Director of coaching, City 2, and then he went back to director of coaching afterwards. And then he kept that position, which was basically morphed into a technical director, not just director of coaching, keeping all of the organizational philosophy in line with what every coach was doing at every stage, but it morphed into working with Lutz on building the roster and all those decisions. Then he's given the interim coaching job in 2024, but then he's passed over for the full-time head coaching position after he says he wants it. Okay, that's okay. We understand that it's because he's more valued to Lutz as technical director, his right-hand man, helping him make these decisions than he is as head coach. And that right there speaks to Hackworth's value at that level, the sporting director, technical director type level. That's a notch in the hat for John Hackworth in what he's doing now and the sporting director role. But now, as he's given this co-interim sporting director job and in line or not in line, but being considered, as Diego said specifically in an interview, being considered for the sporting director job, what happens if Hackworth's passed over again? And so now he's in an organization that he has helped build from the ground up, but they've passed him over for a head coaching job. And now they've passed him over for a sporting director job. I think there's risk at this point of how many times can you pass over John Hackworth before he actually accepts some other offer that will eventually come his way for one of these roles. He is a commodity in Major League Soccer in the sphere of coaching. So at some point, if we pass him up twice, once for each of these roles, I got to figure that other teams are going to come calling, and he's going to want to advance his career in ways that they'll allow him. And that if that happens, it won't include St. Louis City. And that will be a borderline travesty for as much as Hackworth has given this club, and as good as we've seen our on-field performances when he's been on the sidelines, and as much as we understand him to be valued and needed in the front office based on Lutz's comments alone related to the head coaching search, there's nothing negative anybody has to say about John Hackworth. I don't think there's anything negative anybody can say. And if you want to slam dunk for getting the fans behind this move, I really think it's John Hackworth. Now, I'm also not saying it's Hackworth or bust, but at the same time, I do want to make sure that, we think about the implications if Hackworth's not chosen, that could cost us John Hackworth as a front office role. The other things are, if John Hackworth gets this, the head coach might not have that MLS experience. So be ready for something like that. I think that's actually pretty close to about all that I have. If I'm in a good mood this weekend, it'll be because Mizzou won, and I think it'll be the first of just get a little Mizzou talk in this one because they play Central Arkansas on Thursday. I am looking for a 9+ win season for Mizzou. I think it'll be a difficult season, and as of right now, they have a quarterback controversy going into this first game. So between Bo Pribula and Sam Horn, we'll see what happens. That's my only Mizzou talk, I promise. For more Mizzou content, follow me on social media. But this weekend is David Critchley's latest attempt at putting his name in the hat for head coach. I still say that because we have 7 games left. It is still possible. We could end the season 10-8-1 under David Critchley. If he wins out all 7 games, would that be enough to get him the job? Possibly. I would strong argument in that case. But I had a conversation with Tom Timmerman and with Tom and Justin the other day. And I think the concept was late in games, would we rather see City play for ties if things are going bad, or close something out a little earlier? Maybe if they're up 1-0 or 2-0, park the bus at like 60 minutes. When is going to be too early to park the bus? And I mentioned this because I would like to tie this into soccer and the Houston Dynamo game. Parking the bus at home that early is not usually something you like to see or want to see. But let's think about the difficulties that City has had in closing out leads. And the one thing we haven't seen them do is park the bus at that point, whether it's a 1-goal or 2-goal lead. We've seen them lose leads all the time. We've seen them lose leads, gain them back, and lose them again. At this point, I made the argument, and I'll make it again, I wouldn't mind to see them park the bus with being up 1 goal if the game state necessitates it. Not immediately after scoring the goal, but let's say you go for the second goal. It doesn't happen for 5 or maybe 10 minutes. And then you understand you're actually being pressured a little bit more. Change it up, park the bus, do what you need to do to hold that 1-goal lead. That has not been tried yet, is my biggest point. And for a team that's looking for answers on how to find this balance in keeping leads, especially in the last 10, 15, 20 minutes of a game, that I think it's a viable option. And I'm at least leaving myself open to, if that happens, trusting in that as an idea that we haven't done it yet, and we've had a lot of failures in trying to hold a lead. So I wouldn't mind seeing it. With that said, enjoy the game this weekend. Hopefully we don't have anybody more than Cedric Toyshirt on the injury list. I do think that I like my 11. I think it's likely based on the past few games, and getting Falou Fall in with Henry Kessler could be the answer to try and shore up our defense. Try that as an opportunity. Maybe Orozco is in there as well, but as good as Kessler and Baumgartel have been playing, and I do know they allowed 0 goals in the run of play. That can't go overlooked again in this conversation. That's a thing. And so Falou Fall with Henry Kessler, I would like to see. But honestly, the biggest question to me isn't the lineup as it relates to open play, because we did see a really good open play defense last week. They have got to find a solution for their set pieces. They have got to make sure that they're not leaving anyone unmarked, because it wasn't just the set piece goal and the 2 PKs from last week. Thomas Muller was open at least twice on 2 of those corner kicks, and they generated 11 corner kicks to our 1. We have to shore up that phase of play. We cannot allow Houston to create these corner kick and free kick opportunities. We have to generate more than that. let Edu Leuven, let Marcel Hartl take these corners, take these free kicks, generate more. That will help us put the pressure into the final third for them. And just in general, when we are on set piece defense, you have to do a better job. I can't say it any more clearly than it's been very disappointing seeing our set piece defense continue to fail us match after match and allow goal after goal, 1 goal, 2 goals, or whatever. It's not acceptable. And as much as we shore up this balance in the run of play, if we don't fix what's going on in the set piece defense, we're going to continue to lose games. But at the same time, the positive that I'll leave you with is we are scoring goals. 3 goals, 2 goals, 3 goals, or 2 goals, 2 goals, and 3 goals in the last 3 games. That's something to build off of. And that tells me that is a reason why I want to see these front 6 in. Songbin Zhang is first and foremost a reason for that. And I almost got out of this pod without recognizing Songbin for being called up to the South Korean national team for, I think one of those friendlies is against the United States. If I pull that up really quick, the U.S. men's national team on September 6th at Sports Illustrated Stadium in New Jersey, and then against Mexico on September 9th at Geodis Park in Nashville, Tennessee. So Songbin will be unavailable during that time frame around September 6th, September 9th, that weekend. That should be next weekend, actually. So let's pull up a schedule really quick and see what game he's going to be missing. But massive congratulations to Songbin for making the South Korean national team and for doing this after almost being just relegated to a non-existent role under Minnesota. I have a hard time thinking that Songbin's called up for, maybe I'm wrong, for South Korea if he's still wallowing away, not seeing minutes for Minnesota. The fact that he's fit, he's performing, and he's excelling under St. Louis City, I think that spotlighted him a little enough for South Korea to want to pick him up. And so the game that Songbin will be missing is against FC Dallas on September 6th, when he'll be playing the U.S. men's national team. Could get a preview of that with Jack McGlynn. I didn't see if McGlynn's called up for the U.S. men's national team or not. But anyway, he's a fringe player for Houston on them. So extremely excited for Songbin. We'll miss him against Dallas. That'll be an opportunity for somebody else to maybe try to get some minutes, whether we see Joyner or Salio in there, or Simon Betcher or Cedric Schweitzer if he's healthy. But for this game against Houston, more Songbin, more Songbin, more Songbin. That's all I can ask for at this point, because his work with Klaus has been magical lately, and we need more. With that, I will say enjoy the game. Thank you for tuning into Flyover Footy. Appreciate you spending time with us in Talking City and previewing this match and looking at all of this monumental news that's happened this week. It's not, you don't like to have 2 huge breaking news type weeks in one season when it relates to staff movement. First the coach, now the sporting director, but we just need to right the ship. And we'll look forward to talking about that more in the coming weeks. For now, enjoy the game against Houston Dynamo, and we'll talk to you later. All right, thanks for joining me, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your Thursday evening. Go Tigers, MIZ, and go City.